Good evening, everybody. Caspian webinar series. Today's webinar is on India's EdTech space, and I am privileged to introduce you to the panelists that we have today. All fabulous people, a mix of investors and founders in the education space, who are together going to discuss how EdTech has been affected due to COVID in overall, as far as the strategy is concerned, with a lot of focus on the affordable education segment, because that's what all the the founders and investors that we have on this panel today have focused on for their entire career. Uh, First, I would like to introduce you to Ms. Chitra Ravi, founder and CEO Chrysalis, which is an education, research and innovation organization that works with more than 1,000 schools across India, with a primary goal of redefining quality of education delivery in schools. Chitra, welcome on this panel. Great to have you here today. I would then like to introduce Mr. Girish Singhania, founder and CEO EduBridge, which is a company that works in the skilling space, enabling access to skill development courses for youth who live not just in the primary urban locations, but also in several semi-urban and second tier 2 locations across the country. I would welcome Girish to this panel. I would then want to welcome Mr. Nirav Khambati, partner Kaizen West, which is Kaizen West is an education-focused impact investing firm. Nirav leads the impact investing initiatives out of that. Before Kaizen, Nirav has held several roles across the Tata Group. Most importantly, he was the CEO of Tata Class Edge and Tata Interactive Systems before he joined Kaizen West as a partner. Welcome, Nirav, to the panel discussion today.
Thanks for having me.
I would then like to introduce you to Mr. Vishal Bharat. Vishal is the founder and director of CBA Capital. He's an advisor and investor in several companies. He manages the India Education Investment Fund and has several years of experience in investing in the education sector, as well as, he has a deep experience of the financial inclusion sector as well. Vishal, good to have you with us today here. Welcome.
Great, thanks, Abhishek.
And last but not the least, the moderator for today's conversation, I would like to introduce Ms. Ragini Bajaj Chaudhary, Director Strategic Initiatives at Caspian. At Caspian Debt, Ragini wears multiple hats across business development, strategic initiatives, and developing customer initiatives across different areas. Prior to Caspian, Ragini was the CEO of Grey Matters Capital India, where she almost built the early stage investment thesis ground up and helped Grey Matters Capital build a portfolio of high impact education companies in India. Ragini, welcome you to the conversation, and here on I leave it to you to take this conversation forward. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Abhishek. And thank you all for making it here. And I am very excited by the interesting blend that we have here on our panel. We have entrepreneurs, we have fund managers who've been entrepreneurs and who've been in education sector. So I don't think in terms of experience, we could have had a better match. It would be like preaching to the choir, but we all know that 17.8% of world's population lives in India. And median age of Indian population is 28. And around 29% of them are below 14 years. So we are really talking about one of the largest education, skilling, employability sector in the world. And hence it has attracted a lot of attention. And also it is still not mature as an ecosystem today. And on top of this, as we were getting excited about all the investment in this sector, COVID has sort of happened. And before also COVID happened, we were grappling with the learning outcomes divide between rural India, urban area, learning outcomes divide between private schools, public schools. We were grappling with digital divide across India. Today, only 14% of rural population has any digital access, or only 13% can use internet. And in this situation, COVID has happened, which has accelerated a lot of things and also has challenged us a lot. So given this background, I would like to go to Girish first. Given the kind of business that you were in, how has your strategy changed? How have you coped with the changes that were sort of forced upon you? And if you could tell us in few lines about your business first, that would be very useful.
Thank you, Ragini, and thank you, Caspian, for firstly having me. This is a quick background of the work that we do. So we're a workforce development platform providing right from career counseling to training to placements, recruitment, the entire array of services to the youth, ranging from age group of, let's say, 16 to 30. What we do is essentially we identify unemployed youth. We help them identify their strengths, weaknesses, interests, and abilities. Basis that, we sort of provide them the relevant skill sets and mindsets which are needed by recruiters. And then we get them with those recruiters and actually get them those jobs. So on one hand, we help the unemployed youth find these jobs. And on the other hand, we help recruiters find trained talent who are trained to do the job which they want to do. So the idea is to sort of bring the two together because there's a massive demand-supply mismatch in this entire labor market that we have in India. So that's what we, as the underlying of everything that we do, this is sort of the underlying. Now, to answer your question, Ragini, the change, it's chalk and cheese. I mean, it couldn't have been more drastically different. Right up to March or right up to February, let's say, we didn't do any training online. Apart from some of our internal training online, we didn't do any of our training online. We were running physical training centers in more than 60 cities across the country, which each of these training centers, by the name of EduBridge Career Academy, would train the students for these jobs. And we were always sort of dabbling with the idea of doing online training. We ran several pilots, and the results are always a mixed bag. And so we said, okay, it just kept getting pushed back. But come March, towards the end of March, and when we realized that this is not going anywhere, it's not that it's reopening on 15th April, we said we don't have a choice but to sort of go online. And I don't think there can be a bigger defining moment for us as an organization. From then on, our team sort of managed to get together and put together our entire online learning platform. Well, it helped us because we already were using technology in a fairly large way through use of our LMS and all of that. All of our operations were controlled through our MIS system, etc. So that helped. But we still had to build the entire training engine online, the full portal online, which we actually managed to do in very, very quick time. And we had to design it as per what our audience would understand, and B, enjoy and C, learn, so that they can get that job. Because for us, in our programs, outcome is not very subjective. Outcome can be actually measured very, very objectively through the chances or through the employment that the learner actually gets. And so it is very, very important for us to understand the entire cycle before we made any assumptions. So our strategy from April onwards was to actually run a pilot of several students. So we actually ran pilot with 2,000 students where we trained them online to see the results through various assessments at almost on a weekly basis to sort of understand what can be corrected, what needs to be corrected. And we did all of that. All of our trainers had to be retrained. All of our trainers, so that was a huge, huge effort to sort of get all of them retrained. All of our curriculum had to be actually be re-engineered to be able to cater to the online learning methodologies. All of our trainers who were sitting at home had to be well equipped with all the infrastructure, technology, computers, whiteboards, or whatever other training tools that they would need. So all of this sort of had to be done, and we were also learning this on the go. So we managed to sort of do all of that, pick up all the learnings, and we then sort of decided that, okay, online seems to be working very well for this audience. We took feedback very, very regularly, and the feedback we got was outstanding. The attendance percentages that we would see at our physical training centers would average about 76, 77% in the pre-COVID world. And now in our online, we're averaging 82, 83% attendance online. So even from that perspective, all of the metrics that we look at, all of the metrics sort of were looking up. So which is why our strategy totally changed. We started reaching out to students online, which we never did earlier. We obviously started doing our training delivery online, which we never did earlier. Recruiters started opening up and actually started recruiting online, which also they would never do earlier. So along the entire continuum of counseling the youth, training the youth, providing the youth with that employment and getting the youth to join the recruiter, along this entire continuum, it is completely turned upside down. And I actually believe it's for the good, and I definitely believe it's here to stay. Though I say that with a little bit of caution, because I think there are certain elements which are still important, which needs to be sort of delivered still in the traditional methods. Where peer-to-peer learning or relationships, there are certain key aspects which cannot be replaced as much as we want technology to replace that. But there are still certain things which I think will continue. But from a strategy perspective, complete overhaul. I mean, even the fabric of our team, the people, we actually got in several new people during this time. We've hired a bunch of new people because of the new skill sets we wanted in the organization. So on every count for the organization, there's been a drastic change. And I do believe this has been the defining year for us, this pandemic.
So there is a question which has come up, and I don't want to lose the momentum, so I'll quickly ask. The question says, how did you manage the practical aspects on the online thing? That is one. And secondly, how did your target group change because you were going online?
So the first one, we tried to make it as close to reality as possible. So in the physical world, we used to actually do all of our training was either through movie clips, role plays, games, exercises. It was all by doing. So we continued that. So we ensured that we were still making them to do role plays. We were still making them play games. We used all kinds of softwares, all kinds of simulators, even for places where we had to actually train them on computers. So there we had a restriction, of course, because not everybody had access to a computer system. So we had that restriction. But whoever did, at least, for them, we made sure that they were practicing. We were getting feedback on the assessment, and then feedback was being shared. So all of that we tried through simulators and technology to sort of build as much as possible. But of course, like I said, there are certain limitations which, as much as we want, we cannot sort of build. Two, which is actually one of the very, very surprising parts for us, was that although we could not do a lot of training which required computer-related skills because not everyone had access to the computer, but surprisingly, even people coming from marginalized backgrounds were willing to see this online, to see how this plays out online. And I think that has been one of the biggest gifts of this pandemic. The audience or the section of society which earlier was not willing to embrace online learning, including me. I will put my hand up and say I was also not a big fan of online learning. But I think this showed us that it's possible. In the minds of that learner from a marginalized background, it showed that there is a possibility that I could learn. And they were willing to explore it because they didn't have a choice. On exploring it, they realized, well, this is doable. This sort of helps me in not having to go to the physical location every day. I can do it from the comfort of my home, probably anytime, and through any of my devices. So the audience did not change drastically either for us, apart from those courses which require a heavy computer usage, where obviously the audience had to change, who had to have computer systems at home. But apart from that, we've done that thorough sort of comparison and did not change drastically for us.
Great. Thanks, Girish. Coming to you, Chitra, what was happening with your school's principals, Affordable? Were they also as excited about the change as Girish experienced with his clientele?
Yeah, I mean, I can see so many similarities with what Girish said, but also so many contrasting things as well. You know, it's so strange. So, as you know, Chrysalis works with schools, private schools largely. A large portion of our customer base come from the lower strata, the affordable private school segment. And we work in the formative year space, right? You know, the pre-K to grade 7, grade 8. So actually, I think where we drop off is where Girish should pick up, right? And in this space, we had initially a lot of ideological dilemmas, right? Because we have, and I would also put up my hand and say, being in the formative space, I felt that the smell of book, the pencil, and all that, you know, because I'm sure I know Neerav and Vishal and all of them keep asking us, you know, how much of technology can you bring in for the business scale and all of that. We have been always very, I would say, you know, cautious because you know, it's very important for children to have that sensory experience and all of that. But we were surprised. I mean, that's why I said a lot of what Girish said resonates with us, because the way the whole ecosystem and all the stakeholders, you know, changed literally overnight was extremely exciting for us. And we ourselves had to put out a lot of stuff to help. So I think one difference would be Girish could call himself a consumer facing business, whereas we, our route was to the child and the parent through the schools, right? So it's pretty much B2B or B2B2C, as you call it. So our focus was on, you know, really strengthening our relationships with our customers, because they were all in this turmoil and, you know, what next kind of scenarios. So we had to put together a very, very simple learning management system. We went through the whole works of exploring a lot of learning management system, but we felt that was complicated and complex for our audience, who are the so-called teachers, or the parents especially, who do not have the luxury of you know, the device and the connectivity and all of that. So we had to look at synchronous, we had to look at asynchronous learning. A lot of videos were developed because you know, even WhatsApp is a great tool for us to you know, flash videos and video lessons. But I think the good part is, yes, the teachers really rose up to the occasion. I again, I'm saying a lot of things like what Girish said, right? Initially, we also had a lot of technology elements, and we would keep going and asking them to use it. And now they were asking us what more of technology. So that, I think, is a good thing, because then we are able to do a lot more of cost-effective support to the schools. There is a lot of, you know, I was just going through our reports. We onboarded, out of the 300,000 students we have as a customer base, about 200,000 students got on board our LMS platform, which is in my mind huge. And I was just looking at some of the data as recent as yesterday. And we found that, you know, we had a feature where students can actually upload their work on our LMS for a teacher or for us or for the parents to archive and keep, and then that's being graded and all of that. We find that we have an average of about 60-70 student work per student. I mean, imagine the kind of repository we have now and what we could do with it, gather insights, do a lot more of research on how outcomes are being you know, achieved in schools, which otherwise we would always have to proxy it, right? We would go to schools, ask them for data, and here in our whole repository, we have a sudden splurge of a lot of that. So I think those are all the good parts. But again, I don't need to emphasize it. We all know here, I'm sure the audience and all of us know here, we are very far away in the digital leveling, you know, concept in India. It's still struggling. While I say 200,000 plus students are on board, the usage would be very, very roller coaster. So the worry is always, you know, are the children getting the due, right? And we've been also tempering it, because we believe that a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old should not be stuck to the screen time for, like, say, you know, 5 hours of schooling. So there's also that constant reminder And in that, the digital divide, on one end is the lack of connectivity and infra, and on the other side, you have lack of exposure in the parent profile. So with all that, we are very far away from saying that the school ecosystem can move online. So I have a lot of reservations there. But having said that, Ragini, I think it's been eye-opening in many ways. And I think the path of the future has to be tread so carefully while we maintain the child and the childhood. How can we use and leverage technology to achieve, what all of us here are trying to achieve, not just learning outcomes, but developmental outcomes. I keep saying that, right? Chrysalis is not in the business of only learning outcomes. We are an organization that focuses on developmental milestones, social, emotional learning. And I think the peer collaboration, relationship, all this, we have challenging questions before us. But I think the door is opened, and we got to see the light and see how do we travel along, what revolutionary things we can make while not compromising on the child and the child's needs. Yeah, that's how I would put it.
Yeah. So how to keep child in the center, irrespective of whether you are doing it digitally or physically.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I would like to go next to Nirav. Nirav, what are you, what are the trends that you are seeing among your entrepreneurs? What is happening? How have they coped in this situation?
Sure, Ragini. But first of all, thank you for having me here, and congratulations for putting together this panel. Great to be in the midst of these brilliant people. I just want to maybe start off by saying something slightly cheeky, but I compare education to NH44, right? India's longest highway, which used to be NH7, runs from Srinagar to Kanyakumari. So as you go on that highway, you go through urban locations, you go through rural locations, you go through fairly sophisticated and well-to-do locations, you go through really poor locations. Education also is, as you know, quite diverse across socioeconomic groups, and it's also quite diverse across various stages of the learner. And I agree with everything that Girish has said. I agree with everything that Chitra has said. And the difference that we are seeing in perhaps their observations regarding uptake of EdTech is also because of the particular socioeconomic strata that they deal with, or the age group that they deal with. I mean, Girish, for example, is dealing with students who have a higher level of self-motivation given the age bracket that they're in.
Right.
Whereas Chitra, on the other hand, is dealing with students who are younger and therefore need a bit more hand-holding when it comes to self-learning, right? So that's exactly that something that we're seeing within our portfolio. We have the benefit of having companies across all the age groups, and at Kaizen West, our motto is always been to attract more private sector, non-state participation and capital to education. So in some ways, while we do very impactful work, we want to actually mainstream education investment. We don't want to keep it restricted to just impact investing, right? Because education investing truly delivers impact and sustainable returns. So having said that, I think when it comes to companies of ours that are into tech, well, they've never had a better day. They are all doing very well. And like Chitra said, I think before the pandemic, everybody looked at technology with a half glass empty mindset, right? This is not available, and that is not available, and this is not working, and that is not working. After the pandemic, everybody looks at it at the half glass full attitude, saying, oh, but at least this is there for allowing us to have some kind of continuity of learning. I mean, from the perspective of education institutions, it allows them to create a basis to continue charging some fee to the parents. from the perspective of parents and students, this is a way to ensure that the academic year is not entirely lost. I'm going to sort of focus more on that part of NH44, which you touched upon, which is affordable education. And within that segment, I think the largest population of students is in the K-12 segment. Because we know that there's a fairly steep dropout beyond even the 10th standard in that segment. So tertiary education still remains a distant dream in that segment. And while they've started understanding the importance of early childhood, I think the penetration of early childhood also in that segment is not very high. So most of the children in this segment actually are concentrated in the K-12, or as a matter of fact, actually K-8 segment. If you look beyond just tech, there's a story of another extreme. The sector has been devastated. And the K-8 schools that actually cater to families at lower or lower middle income strata, these institutions have completely lost their income simply because their customers have lost their livelihood, and therefore they're not able to pay any fees to these institutions. Now, on the other hand, these institutions, their cost structure is fairly fixed because their costs are teacher salaries and rent for the premises that they pay. And they've just not been able to pay these fees. So they have jumped to technology more out of desperation than love for technology. Right? And Vartana, which provides school financing, about 4,000 schools in their portfolio within the first month they created a platform on behalf of all their customers. And the first one, they had 1,300 of their schools that adopted the platform. So great uptake. But the primary reason was this, that it gave the schools a basis for going back to parents and collecting at least some fees. But technology is not the panacea, as we know. And I think Chitra pointed out some very relevant issues. More so again, within this particular segment that we are focusing on, device availability, for example, is a significant issue. Also teacher training. How many teachers in this segment actually today have the capability of applying the right kind of instructional design, which is suitable for digital transmission? So this is something which hasn't been spoken about enough, but we better do so. Affordable learning is actually the unsung hero of India's education revolution. And today, 40% of India's 260 million odd school-going children go to these affordable schools. About 75% of them charge less than $20 in fees. And if this sector collapses, then that would be a huge backward step for India's education. And I sincerely hope that collectively all the stakeholders can come together to address this problem in some manner. Thank you. Back to you, Ragini.
Thanks, Nirav. I think you really brought out a point, which is that, it's not, the divide remains, and it's not equal access for all, and it's not all good news post-COVID. Coming back to you, Vishal, how is it that because your portfolio companies also sort of range from skilling to K-12 and others, how has been their experience across? How are entrepreneurs coping with the situation?
Thanks, Ragini, for having me. It's great to be part of a Caspian initiative. It's like a homecoming for me. So thank you, Abhishek, as well. Look, we are very cash flow focused investors. The companies we've invested in are very young companies, less than 5 crores in revenue, from about 5 crores in revenue to about, let's say, 70, 80 crores in revenue. All companies in our portfolio, every company has at least 20, 30, 40% very stringent low income requirement. The positive thing that has come out of this is I can speak for the entrepreneurs that they've actually had an opportunity to sort of think of the business ground up afresh. and sometimes making difficult decisions, laying people off, cutting expenses that they were planning, maybe tempering some growth expectations with a cash flow thesis in mind. Several other entrepreneurs have fully pivoted. Actually, I saw an earlier question that was asked, would the transition to online, if COVID would have not happened, would it have ever happened? I think COVID has accelerated the transition. And it's a very good thing for us as a country. All the statistics that have been said, a country where 30 crore young kids, adults are part of the education system, the number is only increasing. 14% of the population is below 14 years of age. Sorry, 20% of the population is below 14 years of age. I think overall, we've accelerated towards it. Does not mean on campus is dead. And I actually think it's been great. It's told us and the various entrepreneurs who are the winners and the losers, who were able to change quickly their business plans. They were able to react. They were able to get some of the government financing schemes to, put band-aids on the cash flows. And they've actually come out stronger. I've got 3 companies that started with a particular product set pre-COVID. Their product set is totally different today. And they are making more revenue now than pre-COVID on a month-on-month basis. Actually, they'll end the year with a higher than their original budget. On the other hand, I also have few companies that are not going to do so well because they are tied to the school system. And the school system, as Nirav said, has not been able to really, pay the vendors.
Right.
Over there, we are happy that we've been able to, play a role in supporting the lower income schools and the government schools. We are really quite hopeful when the government schools open, they'll actually have a very nice blended model rather than only an on-campus model.
This is the time for us to do a short poll with the audience. So just give us a minute. The poll will be set up. Let's see what they think about this. Kamal, are you on? Yeah. You guys want to try? Great. So we will have the results soon. Some of the questions when both you and Girish and Chitra were talking were about enrollment and learning outcomes while going online. If you could quickly react to that, then I'll go to the next question. That way we'll keep answering some of the questions that are coming up.
Girish, you can go first.
Sure. So the learning outcomes, like I said, if we were, I think it became even more important to measure them more frequently because we ourselves were learning as we were going. So we started measuring it far more often, number one, to see whether directionally it's correct. It obviously had to be made more objective. The entire assessment system had to be made more objective. For us, like I said, the biggest learning outcome is whether the youth that we train is actually employable or not, whether that youth in the eyes of the recruiter is employable or not. And that's the real sort of proof, or that's the real certificate for the work that we do. And there we were actually very, very pleasantly surprised, where we got very, very good responses. So of course, up to June, there were hardly any recruitments really happening. But we saw from July, August is when recruitments actually started picking up. So all of our candidates who started completing their training in the months of July and August, they did start getting their respective job offers. So from an outcome perspective, of course, from an assessment standpoint, we made it more frequent, and the results were there to be seen. From a recruitment perspective, also, we've seen great results. So we have not seen a significant shift in or a result or a reduction in outcomes per se.
Chitra?
I think it's a little too early to say. Enrollments, of course, I would say, if you look at the affordable private school segment, and I think Nirav elaborated on it, schools are finding it very tough to even have their students, 50% or 40% students pay some kind of a fee or, even report to some online learning, right? It can come in the sector that we are in, the segment of pre-K to 8 or whatever. I think in the younger early education, there is also this conundrum of, okay, so what? I can wait till things come back. Why should I even do something? 6 months is not going to be a big loss, or all those kind of parental, stuff. That is one. And of course, the lower strata, they've lost livelihood. So, they would deprioritize this at this point of time. And in terms of learning outcome, I think there has always been in school education, the spectrum is like, very, very large, right? There are children who would be on on a real spree of achieving more than what they should in their class, to so many children who are just not there yet. I think if you look at engagement, because Chrysalis is a company, does not undermine the need and beauty of engagement. I have a big problem when I talk to policymakers or investors, or since I have some of them here. There's too much focus on outcomes, and I feel in this age group we are forgetting the need for engagement. Because outcome can get a little delayed, right? But if you have lost a kid, and my pinned tweet is always, are we even measuring the mental attendance of children, right? We can only measure the physical attendance. So, and we've lost someone in math or literacy or numeracy at a particular point, it may be very difficult to get the kid again. And so Chrysalis overemphasizes on engagement, and it's a very tough thing for us to explain this. So engagement wise, we have found that, it's again a bit of a roller coaster. So we had to devise a lot of newer ways of motivating students, because even a fancy online gamified thing has its own limitations. Children, crack it and then they are like, okay, I know this, why are you throwing the same thing back at me? So that is one. Outcome, I think it's very early to say, Ragini, because we are only hoping that some kind of a motivation, engagement, exposure remains. And that's the priority that organization like Chrysalis has. We are not, really looking at, okay, in this 3 months, has a child learned to read? I would flip it and say, in the 3 months, is the child even going and looking at the book? Is he doing some activities, right? So I think I will reserve the outcome bit and hope the world comes back to some kind of predictable future before we really harp on outcomes. That's how I would look at it. Yeah.
So our first poll says that 53% feel that the technology will continue, but usage will reduce. But 33% feel that it will remain completely. So it's a there's a lot of consensus that technology will in some form will definitely continue after this. So it's time for another poll where we will quickly do that and come back to the next question. And this time I would like to begin with Vishal. So Vishal, when you talked about some entrepreneurs who are struggling, there are some entrepreneurs who are sort of doing very well, have been able to pivot. So what are the trends that you see? What kind of models are likely to last? Some will be completely out of the window. Any thoughts there?
So the way we've noticed things morph, of course, just access using technology is causing a lot of ease. Young kids can stay at home instead of a driver taking them, or they walking on the road and reaching somewhere. So online, initially, we really all fought it. We fought it to the extent of saying, wow, how can a 6-year-old kid spend time on a Zoom call for 6 hours? I personally believe that they are capable of it. We are basically training them. I actually am very hopeful of a very significant trend that will break because of COVID. It will sort of show, which was already happening. One is this social ethos that if you're not STEM focused, then basically you don't have a reason to really even call yourself educated. अगर engineer doctor नहीं बने तो छोड़ो यार, रहने दो. And I think that's really changing. It's accelerated with the COVID, with the whole 21st century skills bit. Design is considered a very normal, career choice. People, interactive skills are considered real things, and there are careers being formed. Psychology, moderating online groups was the single biggest jobs that were. Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram basically hired 130,000 people worldwide last year. And they were the chat room moderators. And 50% of them were psychologists and English majors. So it's a very interesting thesis we are basically seeing in terms of what is going to be the future. And COVID, if anything, is only accelerating that, which is a very positive thing. We are loving the adoption of learning by doing rather than learning by turning pages of a textbook. Again, because of the distance, the tools will probably morph into kits or online apps, but I think it's here to stay. I mean, this, in a weird way, it has also broken the stranglehold of the traditional, the textbook guys control everything in the school system, and hence the learning had to happen from, let's say, a dozen different authors. I'm not saying that's going away, but it'll definitely give us a chance. Another trend we are very excited about, when I did the first fund 5-6 years ago, we were worried about connectivity. Well, Jio took care of that. 3 years ago, when we started our next education fund, it was about hardware hurdle. Today, this quarter, we are going to pass 300 million smartphones in the country. That means in terms of households, every household probably in the country will have one smartphone. In my microfinance days, it used to be कि एक Nokia का phone है, वो साहब काम के लिए लेकर चले गए हैं. And now it is one smartphone is with the man of the household, but there are one or two other Nokia phones in the house. And I think we are overcoming that hardware hurdle. And hence access will become possible. Low income, urban, rural will be less of an issue. It will really be online and offline. And I think blended learning will be really the way to go. On campus will remain good, but premium.
Great. So the poll results are out. 68% people feel that technology hasn't benefited the underserved people. And only 33% feel that it has. So I'll come to you, Neeraj.
Ragini, I just had a comment on that. That poll should have had a third option called not yet.
Not yet.
I think is very unfair. I think I would have voted for a not yet, right? I mean, yeah.
See, that's why entrepreneurs are called as the most optimist people in the world. So I like that. So, Nirav, when you are looking at different companies and models, are there any models appearing, or are there any solution appearing which could really help us bridge that divide, whether it's a feature phone or whether one phone in the family, or, women not having phone, men having phone, of course it's getting better. I'm not saying it's not getting better. And I do like the word not yet, but till then.
No, some interesting developments that are happening already. And I actually, Vishal made some very interesting and valid comments. And I very much agree with Chitra's comment on not yet as well, because a lot of this depends on now just device availability and the cost of devices, and how quickly that falls will decide how many students come under the ambit of EdTech. And thankfully, the drop has been quite precipitous. I'm hoping that this whole fallout with China would in some ways spur the Indian ecosystem to get more engaged in hardware production, device production. And that would sort of bring scale, which in turn would help us further reduce prices. So that's a key determinant. Now, if we look at where we stand today, well, a lot of change has already happened in certain sections of the society for certain applications. Like, let's look at that part of the income strata which anyway engaged in some form of after school tutoring, right? And they could afford after school tutoring. Now at tier 2 and tier 3 locations, each of these families was forced to make a choice. Whether I send my ward to a local center for in-person tutoring, the tutor quality may not be very good. Or should I let my ward enroll for an online program where at least the tutor quality is much better? Now that choice has been made. Right? More and more families have decided that it is better to let the ward enroll in an online program as long as the teacher quality is very good. So COVID has forced them to experiment. And from whatever information we are gathering from the ground, it seems like they're very happy with the outcome of that experiment and they intend to continue. So that is a very positive trend, particularly for the after school segment. And we expect that that will continue. In the more premium parts of the income strata, where, for example, there is a deeper provision of early childhood, we have experienced in one of our portfolio companies' founding years that parents are very receptive to online programs where they get to learn more about parenting because they're working and therefore, they've never had the opportunity. And plus, children also are very receptive to some of these online programs. In the segment that Girish touched upon, which is around higher education and skilling, there were institutions which were sitting at the fence, like Girish said, not able to decide whether to go online or not. And it was almost becoming, in some ways, a self-defeating proposition because you don't give your 100% to the effort, you then don't see the results, and therefore you sort of stop believing in online. We're seeing a number of organizations now, having made the leap, are realizing that this is something which they should have done much earlier and that this is really working. But I must, qualify that by saying that certain age group, certain learner stage, as well as certain income strata. So those are segments which certainly have benefited from everything that's happening. And that's a trend that we certainly expect to see going forward. Having said that, you ask students, you ask teachers, you ask parents, everybody is just dying for the schools to open, right? For their own reasons. Children want to be amongst their friends again. Teachers don't like the fact that they can't be on the pedestal and see the full class and control that class. In some ways, this being in front of a PC is an equalizer that they're not comfortable with. And parents can't wait for the children to get out of their hair, right? So, I think as soon as schools open, we're seeing that we're going to see that everybody is going to head back to schools. Thankfully, there are a lot of innovations, particularly, for example, if you look at things that are going on in terms of vernacular content development, which going forward would continue to accelerate applicability of online for more and more families in India. And it's purely a demand supply thing, right? As more families come into the ambit of what is affordable because of rising affordability, better internet connectivity, like Vishal mentioned, falling device prices, there will be more and more entrepreneurs who will step forth and develop solutions to cater to their needs. Back to you, Ragini. Thank you.
Yeah. Chitra, I'll come to you now, and I want to address the elephant in the room, which is the national education policy, which has been on our minds. There's a lot of criticism around it. It can be seen as glass half full or empty, but there are two things which sort of stand out. One is the change in assessments and the 21st century skills focus, it talks about critical thinking and all that. So how do you view that, and how does it appear to, how would that affect your business going forward?
It's a big boon, I would say, if I have to call it so, right? And I'm talking about the overall pitch, overall intent. Of course, in India, I think we are all born critics in our own way, and we question rightfully that, how will this happen? how will this be implemented? All of it is true. But if you look at the intent, there is a lot of child-centered aspects in the brought out very emphatically. There is a lot of newness in terms of contemporary topics like assessment and technology to be used in assessment, and even the focus on the early childhood care and education. I think the country is today talking so much about it, whereas earlier it would be, okay, you're an early childhood player, we are not so, we bother more about the test prep scenarios. I think this is going to change the way all stakeholders are going to look at the ecosystem for sure. And Chrysalis, I mean, because many of the things that we've been doing, or our own ideologies are very much reflected in the aspects of NEP. So I totally think that, Ragini, if we have ways in which this can be implemented, actually I would say the COVID and NEP, I don't know, it wasn't timed in such a way, but they both are a very lethal combination for the schools and for us. I think the bigger problems are, like Neerav highlighted, the support and everything that needs to go to the large part of the APS schools and schools struggling with finances and all that. If that we are able to focus on in the next few months or year or whatever, I think then the focus of the NEP aspects as well as technology access, incubating many models of technology, both in curriculum, assessment. And I totally think it will be a very hybrid model. That's what is going to come. We cannot take away the beauty of physical spaces, the social emotional aspects that goes with the children coming in. I completely agree with Neerav that everyone is waiting, for even the students, for the first time, we hear them saying no more holidays. We just want to be there in school. With that being the fundamental cornerstone, I think technology will beautifully fit in for giving more affordable, personalized solutions. I mean, why should it be only for the elite and the more richer groups? I think that should be the real outcome of this pandemic as well as the NEP. But it all revolves around how we sustain the interest, the narratives, and all that stuff comes in a big, huge democratic country like India. So I think we are geared as an organization to play a constructive part, to interpret it in the right way, take the essence, and see how we can move forward. That's the commitment, and a very refreshing. In fact, I've been talking to Vishal and a few other people, and I find, though I've been in this as an educational entrepreneur for 2 decades almost, right? I find a new excitement in me and my team with the NEP, with the pandemic that's shown. We are all behaving like these very young kids starting a startup. And I think that's because the child, like you said, is in the center. And I see all forces, if directed in the right way, can really benefit the future of our country and education system. And I think I'm a very positive person. So, you might find a bias in the way I put it, but that's how I am.
Thank you, Chitra. Girish, quickly.
If I may quickly just add on this point of NEP.
Sorry, you want to go in for that? Neerav, you want to say something? Yeah.
Yeah, on the point of NEP, if I may quickly add, one good thing that's happened, which is also what NEP wants, is schools have been forced to look at the syllabus critically and actually ask themselves, do we really need to teach everything? And this is quite evident even in the government initiatives, which we've been fortunate to be part of some of them as Kaizen West. And the governments are asking, do we really need to teach everything this year? And that is a good development, very much in line with what NEP is also recommended.
Great, thank you.
I think for the first time, Ragini, just a second here, we are all talking about curriculum and pedagogy. Whereas always the thing is on syllabus and portion completion, right? So that's refreshing in itself. I mean, at least it's come into the national narrative of, pedagogy becoming a very mainstream usage. I think the definitions still have to be gotten right, but at least the terminologies have begun. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Chitra. Girish, coming to you again, part of NEP also merges sort of vocational education and the regular education. How does that augur for your company, and how are you viewing it?
So for the last several years, actually for the last 5-6 years, there's already been a lot of work which has been happening on vocationalization of education in school. So in the 7th, 8th, 9th and 10th grades, in these 4 years, there's been a lot of probably close to 100,000 schools, government schools, who already do this. And this is all done under a specific vocational qualification framework, all through the NSDC mechanism. So there's been a lot of effort which has been going around, not just at the school level, but also at the college level. Even in colleges, in several places, colleges for higher education, even for undergrads, a lot of this vocationalization efforts have been sort of going on. Now that NEP sort of has spoken about it and spoken about sort of bringing the two together, I think is another shot in the arm for this entire non-mainstream sort of education, right? Because in India versus other, so if you look at Australia, Germany, countries, UK, which are very, very strong on their vocational training networks, there it's aspirational also to have a vocational training certificate. But in India, everything is about a degree. In fact, if you do a survey, the biggest reason for a degree is a better marriage alliance, more than any other outcome. I mean, that's absolutely true. So the point is, I mean, the entire priorities are not correctly channelized, right? So, which is where when the narrative changes to mainstreaming this vocational education, I think that will do wonders in removing that stigma, so to speak, or at least bringing it somewhere close to a similar level as that of a degree. I mean, there are so many undergraduate students who have given all kinds of interviews, do not get jobs, where come to our programs, and in 3 months' time, I mean, they do get jobs. So it's a lot to do with training which is relevant. So, like Neera was mentioning, it's about keeping stuff which is relevant. So do we need something or not? And which is where I think this mainstreaming of vocationalization or vocational education actually is going to be extremely, extremely beneficial in removing that stigma of a non-degree sort of a course. Because if you're not a degree, you're not a diploma, I don't want it. There is no value, right? So, and I think this is what will help in removing that and getting people to align their aspirations with actual skills and what is needed for career advancement and even for individual advancement, to be honest. So I think that is where the help will be really meaningful.
So I'm going to go around once more, all of you, before we open it up to audience. I want to hear from you one hope that you have in this changing environment, and one concern that is sort of worrying you these days. So I'll begin with Neera.
Sure. Girish, your point regarding marriage alliance really hit home because I met my wife in my engineering days. So absolutely, she was my engineering classmate. So absolutely, but I don't agree with your concept of misplaced priorities. I mean, should that not be high priority? In terms of the hope that I have, what makes me feel good is education has really now been pushed forward in the overall developmental agenda thanks to COVID. If you look at the SDGs today, the 17 SDGs, how much amount of attention is being given to climate change related SDGs, right? And education over the last few years has drawn something like 3 to 4% of the overall developmental investment globally. And that's not appropriate. I mean, we are investing in climate because the forest fires are here for everybody to see. But the fire that not providing education causes is not there to be seen, and therefore we're just kicking the can down the road by not investing in education. Thanks to COVID now, again, education has been pushed to the fore, and that really makes me feel good. It bodes well for our future generations. A concern in the short to medium term, Ragini, is that because these affordable entrepreneurs will not be able to all bear the impact of COVID, we'll see a mismatch between demand and supply in the short term. I suspect, I mean, demand will obviously bounce back. Education is very resilient. We won't have sufficient number of good quality institutions to cater to that demand. Back to you.
Vishal?
I would say my hope is we should have 5 unicorns in India after this big boom in the education space. My hope is that we'd have Indian apps being used outside the country. My concern is if we keep looking backwards and we are not able to move forward. My concern would be not just with NEP or COVID, but the education system really needs to focus on what's going to happen in the next 25 years rather than what happened in the last 25 years.
Thank you, Vishal. Girish?
So my concern first is around how the government will play this entire scenario out in terms of the regulations around all of the education, right from K-12 to vocational to higher ed. I think government has an extremely important role to play, and I think that's a concern on how exactly it will play out on the ground. While and I have done a lot of work with the government in the past, and so my sort of cynicism stems from there. So pardon the cynic in me on the government, but that's where my biggest concern truly comes from. The biggest hope the biggest source of excitement for all of us is the fact that the learner, even from a marginalized background, has seen the possibility of online education. I think, which, believe me, I mean, in our interactions, that was not an option. To even think of online learning was not an option. Now, when I've seen people from below poverty line families actually accepting online as a mode of education, is the hope for me. And I think that is what has truly transformational quality, assuming and hoping that the government would sort of support it and channelize in the right also.
Great. Thank you. Chitra?
Yeah, my hope lies in technology. My concern lies in technology. But if I were to explain that, Ragini, I think all of them said it right. I think today access of certain quality education will be made more possible because of technology. In our own small way, in the last 6 months, we've come up with such lovely high quality teaching, etc., because the distance or all that is not really affected. We've reached the remotest parts of Tamil Nadu and students from varied backgrounds through technology. But an overemphasis, and I feel the market forces will hurry into promoting too much of technology, because I mean, the EdTech, whenever there are many people call us an EdTech company, and I say we are education first, and technology is how we would scale and deliver and all of that, right? So don't. I'm glad at least the terminology is EdTech and not Tech Ed. That's a big thing. But we need to, I think, have that fortitude and all of that to say that market forces and the economics of it do not pull and push that in a skewed manner, and that could take away the beauty of human touch that everyone needs, and more so children for their development. So I think responsible organizations and responsible investment arms should have that, of course, the policymakers as well, so that we leverage tech. There is so much we can leverage technology for. At the same time, there is no need to hurry and put the screen 100% of the time in front of the child. So how do we do this? There lies the hope, and hopefully we will scale that. Yeah.
Great, thank you. We are going to run one more poll before I'll come back to you with some audience questions which have come out. Okay. This is related to what Vishal talked about, unicorns. So
I think there should be an option both here also.
Yeah.
I think you're going to see both for sure.
I think it's both for sure.
It's both.
Yeah.
Can we add that option or no? Resubmit it with the option.
Actually, I must confess, when I read the NEP and this focus on skilling and 21st century skills, the number of new entrepreneur and the new ideas we are already seeing that will address the 7, 8, 9-year-olds up to about 18-year-olds skilling needs. The number of ideas and new entrepreneurs is huge. But the activity in the edtech space is definitely leading to more consolidation conversations
More consolidation. Yeah.
and overall excitement in larger deals.
Yeah. Let's see if the audience shares your view. We cheated by not giving them both. Most people think the new entrepreneurs will join.
Good. Excellent. I love to hear that. More entrepreneurship is a whole skill area in itself.
71% people feel that more entrepreneurs will join. Great. So I'm going to go to the Q&A now. I'll point out questions to one of you, and if anyone else wants to join in, please do. A question to Chitra is, since you are witness to both brick and mortar school format and tech-enabled solutions, what would be the future of actual physical schooling?
I would still want to believe that it will be hybrid, right? I mean, we need, like I said, that touch point. We need the custodianship of a physical space and physical adult stakeholders bring in. But I think the freedom that probably children can get, with choices, right? I mean, that I can access courses that I wish to, that should also be there, because it's ultimately about choices we are able to give to our people. So I don't see in the near future. In fact, I completely agree with Neera. I said it earlier, that at least immediately after the pandemic, there's going to be like a huge rush towards the physical spaces, because we've had enough of this. I mean, I'm also dying to do panel discussions, directly with audience, right? But over a period of time, I think we will have a solid hybrid, and that's what we should imagine and visualize and get to also. It shouldn't be, that we forget this. So I think, in fact, I'm hoping that teachers and schools don't go back to, okay, we've had enough, now stop all this tech and, get us. So that shouldn't be it. So I think in the early education and, at least in the primary and all that, there should be more of physical space. And over a period of time, when children become more independent, they could have more of technology as well, which they can use with remote learning and all that. Yeah.
Thank you, Chitra. Now the question for both of you, Neera, Vishal, has your criteria for investment changed due to COVID? If it has, how?
Neera, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you, Vishal. No, our criteria hasn't changed for investment. Like Chitra, we are big believers of the blended model. And we truly believe that different stages of education will adopt technology at different paces. There is a very important role that school as a social place plays in the life and development of a child, and we shouldn't take that away. Totally agree with Vishal when he said that very many interesting innovations happening now, given the focus on a more well-rounded, holistic development of children. Very encouraging to see the focus on things like, maker spaces and tinkering labs, and like Girish said, vocational education. We remain very bullish on this space. No significant change. I think the whole world post-COVID, that word now sounds like a distant dream, but hopefully we'll get there soon, and life will get back to normal.
Vishal?
I echo the comments. We haven't really changed our criteria. There has been actually learning for me as an investor, we manage 20 education companies. And the one thing that I can tell you is, like, I have a renewed respect for entrepreneurs, education entrepreneurs in this space, who've been able to, either pivot and take advantage of the opportunities that were presenting themselves, and at the same time, the ones who've struggled, but the struggle has been graceful. It's not been like, I'm throwing in my towel and, just go run the business yourself. At the same time, difficult times ask for difficult, decisions to be made. And we are actually very happy with the choices, not in terms of like all companies will succeed, but if anything, our learning is we'll include this as a criteria. What do you do in really difficult times if tomorrow your business effectively shuts down from a revenue point of view? And the entrepreneur's response would be a very good, gauge for us of how they would do in a situation like this. So yes, we remain absolutely committed to the education space and the entrepreneur especially.
Great. Thanks, Vishal. Girish, a question for you. It says, in skilling and education domain, the digital learning has significantly reduced time devotion per day. Do you think this will impact the learning outcome?
So I think, yes, I'm in agreement with the first half of the sentence, which says time devotion per day. So when we were running brick and mortar, at our brick and mortar academies, we would have students there for full day sessions of 5 hours, 6 hours, at times even 7 hours. However, for online, you cannot expect kids to sit in front of the screen for 6, 7 hours in a day. So definitely within a day, the number of hours have reduced. However, the beauty of technology, and especially in skilling, is a lot of the things which probably needed an hour to do can actually be done in 30 minutes online. So a lot of the compression also happens there. Yeah. So while through the day, you cannot really spend that many hours that you were spending, but you are spending far more concentrated with less distraction and focus, lesser number of hours. So the impact is very, very high in those hours. So that hours are more intense and the impact is greater. So I don't think this will, and of course the curriculum has to be re-engineered accordingly. The trainers have to be trained accordingly. Your pedagogy has to be sort of altered accordingly. Assuming all of that in place, that should not impact learning outcomes.
So, made on engagement, that how that has become even more important now in an online thing. So I would like both you and Chitra to respond on that what are ways to build engagement in an online training program?
Engagement with the learner?
With the learner.
So,
also, what are the ways to measure it?
So what we do for engagement is, like I said, our feedback mechanism is, number one is assessments. So we've increased the number of assessments that we do. Like I had said earlier, we used to do assessments every 10 days. Now we're doing assessments every 7 days. Built in several simulators and we've used several software which requires interaction from the student on an ongoing basis. Like how in a physical classroom setup, we used to give them workbooks to write their responses in or write their whatever answers were. We've now got that built online so that people are responding. So it cannot be a situation where there's a monologue being delivered and the child or the learner is just listening. So there is a constant, we've in fact timed it to an extent that there cannot be a stagnant screen for the child, for the learner, and the learner is always interacting with the content which is being delivered. So we do also live, most of our stuff is live classes where we do training through live classes, but we also have modules where the interaction is live, where the candidate has to actually type it out, whatever responses they have right at that point in time, without which the modules don't move ahead. So through this, the engagement is constant on an ongoing basis without human involvement. Wherever we see any concerns or wherever there are highlights which sort of end up showing up as outliers on our, let's say, metrics, that's when we sort of get into it then to address. So that's how the constant feedback and engagement happens with the learner. And wherever we see a gap, there is when we sort of step in physically to try and address that, either through the phone or in some form or the other.
Quick comments, Chitra?
Ragini, I think in this age group that we are in, right, we cannot, at least in remote learning and online learning, when we talk about student engagement, we have to talk about parent engagement. So it's a little tricky because we need to keep the motivation of the parent also high, right? It's not yet that a child can, so that is one part. But I think the key is in interactivity. If you look at a synchronous learning, the teacher capability, I think I saw a few comments and question on that. And it's a new thing for teachers, right? But one thing that's happened is, I think perhaps a teacher can get away in a physical classroom by doing a monologuous, lecture. I think that's not going to work in the online scenario. Either the children, I heard tricks that children play, saying I'm still connecting or something instead of code, So
I see my son doing that so often. He's like muting and video is off, and then he says my internet connectivity is not supporting video.
And then so that's going to happen. So it's going to put teachers under tremendous compulsion to try out new ways to keep the interactivity when it's synchronous. Asynchronous, we've done a lot of work in terms of, I think for children in this segment especially, feedback is important. And in technology too, we should make very good feedback systems, right? When they show, I've seen motivated students, sending a lot of their assignments, but I'm sure they will stop if the teacher is not going to be commenting on it.
Commenting or responding.
So peer, leaderboards and all that, that goes with the typical gaming, gamification ought to happen. And it's a very, very, I think, science that needs to develop, right? We cannot just say, now I can just go and do the same kind of teaching with slight changes. So, but the advantage is, there was one question I saw about the student-teacher ratio. Actually, it's going to give us a lot of freedom to play around with it, right? I can choose from a one-to-one to a large group and bring a lot of interest in each of this. And this is the kind of thinking, when I said we are all excited, it's all about this new science that we are brainstorming and thinking. And I'm sure there will be very good models that come out.
And Chitra, could you take a minute to also explain what is this doing to the teacher? We are talking about technology, we're talking, it's almost being forced upon them. How are they responding to this?
See, I think the teacher always felt high pressure. All I can say is the pandemic has just made it 10 times more for them, let's face it. But I think the good part is, and I think it's some kind of a balancing act now, that everybody is talking about the teacher and the role she's playing. So I don't think the pressure has gone down, but at least her work is acknowledged today, right? Everybody, and I know like people are saying, oh, now I know what it is to be a teacher with 30 kids in class and all of that, right? So, but if you look at the teacher, unless we relieve her and redefine her role, and that's where even we are working on a model when we are working on this new pivot model that we are excited about, we are looking at a teacher journey. And the first point that we have given to our, team is, how do you reduce the work of the teacher? Without that, if you're going to make technology add to her burden, we are in a huge crisis in the country, I would say that. And that doesn't mean you remove her, right? And that's what's happening. I mean, you're just removing her and saying, hey, why do you need a teacher? I'm going to be... So it's a very fine balancing act that we need to do. The teacher, as of now, is struggling, but with her resilience and her power, I think she's holding it. I don't know how long she can hold it, because it's not easy. And the technology and all the tech companies, I mean, I'm just choosing to appeal to everybody. Let's not, go the route of removing her from the value chain itself, or let's not say, I'm going to give you this huge thing and now you make the teacher add more and more, prints on the platform. Either way, it's going to be
It's
a
going to be,
colossal
yeah.
crisis. So I think that's the key issue that every educational edtech entrepreneur can take up. Give the due respect she needs and the due place she needs, and build in a technology that can make life easier for her. And if we do that and give her a revised, beautiful role of being that guru, I think we've done it. I think we are going to have a great, great future for our country.
Great, thank you. So audience, it is just time for last few questions. So if there is anything that is on your mind, please go ahead and ask. There's one question come up, and any of you could answer that. Do you see technology or adoption happening in government schools? Who is best placed to answer this question?
So I don't know about schools so much, but we've in the past 3-4 years back, we used to do quite a bit of work with the government, and I mean their response to this is no online at all. While everywhere else we've taken our stuff online and we're doing the work we're doing effectively, but any government program has not gone online even in the skilling space. So if that argument were to be extended even for schools, I don't know how that will be I have my doubts, reservations if the government would be open to online in government schools, especially given that we actually had a ban on online education for a brief while. So to expect governments to have, I don't think they will probably have government online in government schools.
So there are two questions related to NEP, and one is that will early child education now get regulated since NEP is in there? And have you seen any digital tools used in early child education? So I guess Chitra, you would be.
Yeah, I don't want to get into that regulatory thing. I mean, it's a little early to say. But in terms of tools, I think most, when you look at early education, like I said, the domains of physical, gross motor, fine motor, social, emotional, these are all very critical. And I think it is very challenging for edtech companies to even bring that. So I'm sure that it will come. But as of now, we are far behind that. And that's why even in early education, they say that synchronous learning or live learning is more suitable, so that you just don't put the child in front of the screen. So there is a lot to happen there, Ragini. But I think these are the kind of conversations that should happen in incubation, right? How do we bring certain interactive tools? How do we, what are the aspects that should move to the technology-based learning, and what should remain with the physical? These are all, I hope these are the questions we'll all take up. Yeah.
So there are some questions around negative impact of digital education on children, and pressure it puts on parents to be able to manage that. So if any of you could talk about that, it would be helpful to some of the work.
I can talk about my daughter who's spending more time on the iPad and less time on the playground. I think that definitely is one. And she's all of 3. And so because of the screen time which the school requires her to do, it's almost like an acceptable thing for her, because before that it was very regulated, the kind of screen time she would get. But now it's not, because, I mean, if you're letting me do it for school, why won't you let me do it when I'm doing it otherwise? So it's taking away, I think, from the kids' time outdoors, but this is a very, very personal anecdote, really.
Sure. So sorry, go ahead, Nirav.
Something I'd like to add here. So today, if you went to parents and said that, okay, so you don't want your children to be on digital devices, where would you that they rather be? So I suspect the first answer would be that we'd like them to be more interactive, be on the playground and play and interact with their friends. Now, unfortunately, because of COVID, there are lots of restrictions on that, right? So the next preference would be perhaps they should be reading books. They should be reading all kinds of novels and so on, right? So when the novels first came out, interestingly, parents didn't want their children to read novels. And actually, no, this was like in the 19th century, right? The late 19th century, when mass printing became very common. And that led, because before that, most textbooks were religious scriptures. You never had the ability that, okay, I have this idea, I want to write a story and I'll publish a novel, because, mass printing was not available till, we had all the innovations happening out of Germany for those printing machines and so on. But then the novels started coming out. And when they came out, parents were dead against children reading novels. Because the concern was, because anybody could write any kind of story, novels would lead to their getting susceptible to sexual predators.
Yeah.
Now, what do we tell our children when they today look at digital devices, right? The same thing. So I wonder if 100 years from now, somebody would look back and say, you know what? There are this bunch of parents who actually didn't want their children to access digital devices. So I think every time a new dramatic change happens in the world of education, it always gets rejected by the society. And in fact, writing, when writing happened, Socrates was dead against writing. He said that writing spoils the didactic process of learning and spoils our memory. Thank God he had a disciple, Plato, who wrote down everything that he said, so we at least know that Socrates said this. Right? So,
great.
This is just
Thank you. So I have time only for one last question, which is about entrepreneurs. Do you see many entrepreneurs coming now in this scenario? And what about existing entrepreneurs? How do they manage costs? Because now they have to rejig their whole business model. Quick comments.
If anything, costs have gone down. I mean, I think costs go down. I mean, definitely, at least in our business, they go down significantly when you don't have to pay. But the point is, when you don't have to pay rents, we're still having to pay rents. When you don't have to pay rents, and your number of people sort of managing also goes down. So costs definitely go down. So from an existing entrepreneur standpoint, I can say online has benefits there from a cost standpoint. And I think definitely there are many, many more entrepreneurs coming. And Vishal also mentioned that, and Neerav also mentioned. Definitely more and more entrepreneurs are coming, and many more will come. So I think it's probably right now is the boom. Like how this panel is also sort of named. Definitely, yeah.
Any more last thoughts from?
I agree with Girish that definitely the costs are like go down. We are seeing that in our business as well. But I think what is going to be key is this is a very transitionary phase. Many of us are rejigging, remodeling. So there's going to be temporary, temporary roller coaster rides that will happen. So I think the key for existing entrepreneurs like many of us would be how do we pivot, how do we grow, survive this period, and then go there. That's a key thing. But it's going to be a green field for many ideas to come in and all of that. So there's going to be definitely a boom. I agree with all of you that it has to also consolidate in some way. So it's a very interesting period that we are all in, Ragini. Very exciting.
Thank you. Last words, Neerav, Vishal, before we close this.
Hey, Ragini, I just have one comment. We are as the panelists, we are at a complete loss. We don't know who are in the audience. The only thing we really get to see are their names through some of the questions. So I'm happy to have you guys share, whoever is the attendee. Sure. Please share my email ID or phone number. Sure. And I'd be happy to engage with people, because it's so exciting to basically have people who are practitioners, entrepreneurs, or irrelevant investors, the way I look at it. But it'll be great for us to basically have a bigger ecosystem of people in the education space who are concerned, participants. So happy to be available.
We will send out. We'll put your email address on the chat window. I'm requesting one of my colleagues to do that. Neerav, are you okay for me to put your email ID?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I totally
Okay.
second everything that Vishal said. I think what is most
Chitra,
important.
Girish, are you fine?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Sure, we'll send it across. What we plan to do is cull out key messages and email it to everybody. Some of the questions have not been answered. We might send them to you personally, so and also report them back to the participants.
Please.
It's been wonderful to have you all, and our audience has been so good and so engaged on the chat, and I want to thank them all for their patience. But thank you so much for gracing us today. No words to show our gratitude. But I do want to do this more often and bring you on and learn a lot from all of you.
Thank you, Ragini. I
Thank
think
you so much, Ragini.
you and the Caspian team, thanks a lot for having us and making it such a lovely session. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you. Thank
Yeah.
you, Ragini.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Bye. Thanks.